you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. So today we're going to be talking about your film Witchy Ways. I gotta say it's a very interesting story. I caught my eye and I liked all of like um the romance behind it and moving forward and trying to put, I would say, life before anything else. It was really nice touch. But I wanted to ask you, Jane, what inspired you to bring this story to us?
Well, I was really inspired through researching the witch community. That was my first inspiration because I sort of figured out the tone. I figured out, loosely what I thought the story was, but I hadn't attached to it yet. I need to really usually attach to a film like an idea. Like in the past, I always started with an idea, and this one I actually started with just the idea of like I'm going to work with my friend Maram. Like that was as far as we got. I'm going to work with Maram. She's got a new camera, and she's got this great DP and this great, production producer. I'm going to work with Maram, and then I was like, oh God, like what? What does that mean? What am I doing? And that's not normally how I start a project. I normally have an idea pop into my head, and then that drives me. But I started writing this script after I saw Practical Magic. I did a bunch of research, and that sort of gave me like an idea of tone. I knew I wanted a witch and a ghost, but I didn't know how. But it wasn't until I started researching the witch community that I felt inspired because the things that I learned about that community and their spirituality felt good. It felt right, and it felt like something that was misunderstood and deserved a voice. So that's really where that came from. And then, I mean, as a writer, so much of what you weave in are the things that are on your mind or you've experienced anyway. And Eve's journey is a little bit my journey with my mother. And I hadn't yet put that to film or talked about it much. And so I used this as an opportunity to, just talk about loss and Alzheimer's and not appreciating your parents when they're living, you know. They pass away and you realize you never asked a question, you didn't really know them. They're like, where did they come from? What was their childhood like? Some people do have those relationships with their parents. I did not. I never asked the deeper questions. And I realized it after my mom passed away and even when she got the Alzheimer's, I couldn't ask anymore because those memories were gone. So that was something I wanted to explore. And so I just put those two ideas together and then threw in a ghost.
And and how does it work in regards to doing research? Because I know that there is a lot of like information out there in regards of like witches, witchcraft. That there is I would say like a conception or a visualization of what people think they are, but but some of us know that there are different like covens or different type of like people that do this type of witchcraft and whatnot. But how was your research moving forward? Did you find people that live this type of lifestyle, or was it mainly looking into books or looking into other documentaries?
Right, yeah, it started just online because it was basic. I was like, okay, she's gonna do a spell. Like what I don't know how to write a spell. I'm gonna go online, see what they look like, and then I went on and I found like there were tons of spells. I was like, oh my God, this is just so much bigger than I thought. So I started researching, how big the community was. There was a Pew Research thing that they did that said in 2018 there was 1.8 million self-identifying witches in the United States, which was really a small number compared to the amount of people out there because that was only who was willing to say they were a witch. And then I was like, oh, moon rituals. Okay, I don't know what that is, but I should probably do one so I know. And I was talking to my neighbor and she's like, oh, come down to my house. You can do it with me. And I was like, what? And it turns out, she does regular moon rituals. And then as, we talked a little further, it turns out she might be a witch. Um, not might be. And then I was talking to another friend. We were at happy hour, and she was like, "Oh, I do moon rituals all the time." I'm like, and this is like like a very kind of pragmatic kind of person, and I was like, "Oh, really?" And then as somebody I knew, I asked a friend to who I knew was witch adjacent, like sort of didn't identify as a witch, but had a lot of witch spirituality in her practice. I asked her to make a list of witches in LA that I should talk to. And a name popped up. I'm like, I know that person. That cannot be the same person. I've known her for 4 years and we've had coffee all the time. She's never said it to anything about it. And I called her and I was like, hey, I just got this list and are you a witch? And she's like, well, yes, I am. And well, oh my God. Like people I've known for ages, but they never felt comfortable talking about it because they just assumed I didn't know anything about it and I might ridicule them or I might, who knows what they thought, like society isn't very open to anything that feels outside of normal. So I was really surprised at how far reaching my witch network was, and I didn't even know it. Uh, which made the research easier because then I could start asking people who practiced to explain things to me more. For instance, there's a scene in the film where they're doing a spell, but it becomes intimate. And I had originally written that scene to be sort of more rom-commy, like, oh, they're doing a spell and then they giggle and something funny happens. And, like, and then they end up
Yeah.
like getting intimate. And I was talking to my friend and I said, oh, and then, this turns into something more sexual. And she's like, oh, yeah, that happens all the time. And she used the word intimacy. She's like, when you're doing a spell with another person, there's an intimacy to it that, can fuel the sexual feelings. And she said, so it's not uncommon to do a spell and like end up on the kitchen table. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then I went back and I rewrote it to be more how she described her experience to me, and how it felt to be in the middle of a spell and the connection that you have with this other person that's participating in this moment with you.
That's amazing. Yeah. Now that you're touching bases on that part of intimacy, you do have a very intimate scene. I was very intrigued because most films that are independent, they go through the scene completely. I hope that I hope that I'm sending the correct words to
Yeah.
what I'm
Uh-huh.
trying to say. But in your scene, it was more just to show people like the romance between these two characters. And then you go, there's like I would say probably like a 2-3 minute scene, and then you go to the next scene of the story. What was you just wanted to just show the people like how romantic these two characters are getting into throughout the story?
Yeah, it was a growth, from the first time they, kind of come together, which is, more Danny being the driver in that situation. The next time they come together, it was important mostly because it starts with Danny feeling like she's the driver, but it switches to Eve, and Eve takes some of her own power and moves into a more dominant position or situation. Um, with Danny, and that was like that was the importance to me that they're now going on equal footing. Like at one point, one person is more moving the process forward, and then the other person takes their own power and wants to please the other person, um, and then also the important thing in my mind for any sexual scene is that it's telling you how these people feel about each other, right? It's not about orgasm. And the scene
Mm.
goes, for what it is, for a rom-com, it goes actually a little further than a rom-com would actually go. Um, and in fact would probably get me an NC-17 if I got rated, because it's two women and. But But the important thing was that you see this growing love, this growing trust, because trust is incredibly important, and the joy that they're sort of having in the process of coming together. So it's not like, well, she could have just then had an orgasm and then that would be the end. But sex doesn't always happen that way anyway. Sometimes something happens and then you move on to the next thing and the next thing, and it builds and builds and builds. And so, like, is it going to be a 5 minute scene and then, to take everybody to the end? Or am I showing enough for the audience to get that they are trusting each other, their love is growing, they're finding joy in being with each other, because that was important too. And that's all I need. And in fact, my sales agent is like, some territories, this is going to be too much. And can you cut it? And I was a little reticent at first, but I had actually shot a clothed version of the scene for airlines. So I went
Okay.
back and made sure that I had something so because airlines won't put that on there.
Hmm.
And so I went back and cut it just to see what I could do. And it's about maybe half the length without the major stuff at the end, and all clothes, no nudity. And it still works. It still works in showing you their connection, their growing love, their growing trust, and the joy they're finding in being with each other. So it actually didn't even need to go as far as I did go. I just felt like I should because, otherwise it felt like
Hmm.
a cop out. But yeah.
No, that's amazing. The reason why I wanted to ask is because, usually it's a full scene, and in this case you just focus more on like the romance of these two characters to be shown a little bit much more in a deeper sense.
Yeah.
And Jane, how was the chemistry between you and the cast members? Being the fact that you do see in the film that there is a lot of chemistry between everybody, but how was your interaction with them and while you were filming?
Yeah, well, to begin with, most of the people on the set were friends.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I wrote the role for Candace Kane. David Fimero's been in several things of mine, and so I just called him up and said, "Hey, do you want to do this?" Mark Price, who plays Robbie, is my next door neighbor. Uh, yeah, and Maram is a dear and friend of mine I've known for about 8 years now. The only person who was new to the set was Diora. Um, but we rehearsed, so there was time for us to get to know each other, and the rehearsal included some long conversations between girls, as like we weren't just rehearsing, we were talking as getting to know each other as human beings, so that when we show up on the set, we already know each other and like each other. They have happened to have some great chemistry. Some of that is that they're just good actors and they were really in their roles. Some of it was just they liked each other. It was fun. There was a lot of playfulness. Dior is a really goofy. She can be super, super goofy at times. And I incorporated some of the stuff that's in that movie. In the movie, I was after we yelled cut, but they were just goofing around, or right before action, and Diora was being a goof, and I was like, that's just part of, I love that part of her personality, and it worked for Eve. But I will also say, like, the crew, everybody came to the table with the intention of having fun, because nobody's making money. Let's, like, be honest about that. Like, there's no money, and we shot it in 12 days. We barely scraped our way by 13 days, 12 and a half, whatever. um and we were moving fast, fast, fast. That's why rehearsals are important. Um, a lot of the action scenes were handheld, so we were like, okay, moving over here, and you're here, and you're here, and nah, nah, nah. So there was all this energy on the set. But I think that not only were the actors having fun, and it was I having fun with them because they trust me, because they already know me. But the crew also kind of got in on the fun, and I think really responded to this idea of sort of collaboration that I have. Like, I really like, even if it's a PA, it's like, if they have a good idea, okay, tell me, what's your good idea? And so everybody feels like they're, and I take a lot of ideas that come from other people, because that's how you build something more interesting than what your little brain does on its own. And so I think everybody felt like they had a vested interest in the movie. They had put something into it that was not just, picking up the lunch order, or, moving the camera from one side of the room to the other. You know, it was like it was a really, really, really fun set.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
Jane, this would be my final question for you today. If you could describe Witchy Ways in one word, what would it be?
Joyful.
Amazing. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I agree with your words, Jane. Thank you very much for giving us the time to talk about the film. And I hope everybody enjoys it as much as I did, and hope that we can sit down again to talk about another project of yours in the future.
I would love it. I would love it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Bye bye.